Yeah, so the idea was that this was kind of less of a panel and more of a conversation, I think, and thinking about the theme of the conference, which is kind of where we've come from and where we're going. We thought we really got a good opportunity for kind of you, Mick, and John when he comes in to kind of talk about your ideas of pluralism, and then have a conversation with people who are, you know, relatively recently qualified or are current students about where do we take this. And you made an interesting point yesterday, Mick, about, you know, can we be braver? Can we do things that are braver in the future? So it was more of a conversation between you about kind of your musings, your thoughts, your experiences, and where you go with that.
Okay, great. I think I said quite a bit last night, so maybe John, it would be nice to start with John. And John, do you want to take a bit of time to say what your thinking is at the moment, and then perhaps we can have questions and reflections from the other panelists and take it from there.
Yeah, okay. Am I, can everyone hear me? Is that, am I, yeah, okay. Yeah, I was kind of expecting to be answering questions, so I don't really have a kind of pre-prepared statement to make. I think in terms of the themes of the conference, where we're coming from and where we're going to, I think that I feel really kind of positive and optimistic about pluralistic therapy. I mean, here we are, kind of 200 people, and lots of people have been involved and are involved in the conference in lots of different ways. And I think in terms of the kind of broader world of therapy, there's you know, there's more and more kind of references to pluralistic therapy in different things that are getting published, and a kind of general awareness of it. I think there's a lot for us still to do, obviously. I think that the discussion yesterday and at the conference last year about diversity and justice and inclusiveness and so on is a kind of major priority. And I think there was also something that maybe Anna mentioned yesterday about kind of publicizing our work more and making a wider range of people aware of it and so forth. I think that's also a priority. I think just the other thing I'd like to say is that probably nobody remembers this, but I'm pretty sure that in the first book that Mick and I did, there was a statement towards the end, I think, about we saw this as a kind of open system, like a wiki system or something like that, in which kind of everybody could be involved. It was never the intention that it was a kind of fixed model, that it would, you know, that as people picked up on the basic principles associated with pluralism and applied them in different situations and using their own kind of life experience and knowledge and so on, that it would change. And I really think that that's happening. And I think that's a really positive thing. So I guess I don't know, do you want to add anything, Mick?
I don't think so, John, actually, because I said quite a lot last night, and I think that's a really nice starting point. Maybe what we could do is we could go on to the other panel members.
Yeah.
So we got Janie, Nadia, Christine, Gary, and I can't see Mark. I'm just looking at the program. Mark.
No, Mark can't be here.
Okay, so there's no Mark. Okay, so why don't we go on to, maybe if we start with Janie, just in the order I can see on my screen. And if you want to, if you've got some reflections or questions, and we could take them and have a look at those. Janie, over to you. So you just need to unmute yourself. I'm just going to ask you, Nadia, Christine, and Gary. Yeah, there you go, Janie.
So thanks very much for inviting me to take part in this. My question is about how pluralism has developed. And at times I feel it can be quite rational, linear, logical. And to me, there's a male left brain flavour to that. And I sometimes feel that for me and for some of my clients, life doesn't work that way. Things are a bit more reflexive, that you go in spirals and circles, not in straight lines. And I wonder, I'd be really interested in hearing your reflections on that. I guess my concern is that the goals, tasks and methods, logical linearity misses out on the more fluid, feminine, emotional curviness of life.
Yeah, can I take that one first, John, and then yeah, I think that's a brilliant observation, Janie, and I think that was, and that came, I mean, John might disagree, I think that came more from me, that kind of linearity, and I think it reflects my, I don't know, OCD, structural, kind of quite, you know, I like things in boxes, and I like to kind of know, which is a kind of, you know, quite a personal thing. And I think for me, when we were writing that original book, the idea that you could have goals, and then you had ways of getting to those goals, and then you had kind of ways of getting to those tasks to do the goals, was a really nice kind of neat framework. And if you look at the work I'm doing on direction and at the work I'm doing right now, again, it's kind of, there's a focus on kind of ordering things and putting things in boxes. And I think part of that is positive. I think there's a positive element of that, which is about kind of demystifying stuff. I mean, my main tutor was somebody called Ernesto Spinelli when I trained. He did a book called Demystifying Therapy. And it was really about trying to get away from these kind of vague, I'm helpful because I'm a counselor and it's just my presence, and actually say, look, what is it that we're doing? And I think that for me, that's always been a really important question, to try and kind of democratize through trying to make things transparent and say, look, you know, if we're doing counseling, where is it that we're going to? And I think pluralism was a lot about trying to democratize. But I absolutely accept your point that it is a very left brain way of looking at things. And I think I've seen, certainly, I hope one day John and I and maybe others revise that original book. And certainly one thing I would change is that kind of linearity there, because you're absolutely right. It doesn't reflect the reality of therapy for a lot of clients. But I think the challenge then is to find a way of doing that and reflecting that circularity without losing the kind of clarity that I think that can potentially and hopefully bring. So I think there's a challenge there for pluralism. John, did you want to say more about that?
Yeah. I think this is a really great question, and I remember, Jenny, you asked that question. It must have been in some class I taught years ago, and so I've had lots of time to rehearse an answer to it. I think that I actually, I don't think it, I don't think it, I think obviously in some respects it is linear, but it's, in other respects it's not linear. I mean, Julia and I have just finished on a new edition of our book on counselling skills, and one of the early chapters in that kind of presents kind of well-established kind of 3-stage models like Egan's model and Clara Hill's model of counselling skills, and which are very explicitly linear, and kind of then critique that by saying, well, from a pluralistic perspective, these kind of very linear ways of thinking can be appropriate, but actually a pluralistic perspective allows you to work with whatever's happening for that client at the moment without making assumptions about what the next step is going to be. In other words, the next step is always negotiated and so forth. But I think the other thing is that, or just a few other observations. I think that the goals, tasks, methods, and shared understanding can also be viewed, and I view them as a checklist, right? Because from the start, I was and still am really skeptical about a kind of collaborative or pluralistic form of practice that was actually in the therapist's head rather than being visible in the interaction between the client and therapist. So as a kind of trainer and as, you know, a therapist myself and a supervisor, I think it's important to be able to see moments when goals are discussed, moments when some, you know, I'm not saying you call it goals, but, you know, there is a goals conversation, there's a task conversation, some sort of reflection on possible methods and so on and so forth. And for a long time, I've kind of worked on the idea of trying to create this, recreate it as a checklist. And I've never kind of managed to do that, but because I think a checklist needs to be short and very easy to understand. I've never quite managed to do that. So I think that's another way of putting it. It's a kind of checklist of things that need to happen if there's going to be authentic collaboration. I think then that I think one of the important, really important developments in pluralistic practice following the initial book and even the handbook is the amount of arts-based and creative ideas that have come into it. Very few have really been written up. And I think there's a lot to be done there to kind of document that so everyone can share it. And, you know, your group's been working on that and so forth. But I think that's kind of, you know, kind of creative writing and visual representations and so on are kind of linear and also not linear at the same time. Yeah. And then I think the further thing, I don't know if this is relevant, but I'm just kind of throwing it in here because I think it's significant, is actually the value of episodes within therapy. There could be whole sessions or even sequences of sessions that are very unstructured, right? And I think that I was trained, and I think Mick was trained as well, to be very comfortable with that, to be working in the moment with the process. And I don't think we ever kind of emphasized that in the book. And I sort of, so that from somebody like me who's come from a person-centered perspective, I can very easily, once it's been negotiated, just be there and empathically engage and help the person to explore without any linearity or in it at all. And I think that's something else that I think might be good to kind of find a way of kind of emphasizing a bit more. In other words, that to me, pluralistic is a kind of combination as appropriate of the kind of very structured, purposeful work that, say, classic CBT might do, and also at the other end, kind of psychoanalytic free association or something like that. There's a place for any of these things as long as it's agreed and as long as it's checked out afterwards. Was that helpful? Should we do more of that? And so on. So I don't know, I've gone off on a bit of an extended riff.
No, thanks, John. I think that answers a lot of it. I just want to pick up one other thing Jamie said before we go on to Nadia, which is just about, you know, it being quite a male gendered approach. And, you know, again, I think there's a lot of truth in that. You look at John and I were two older white men, and that has implications, and that's kind of depressingly familiar in our field, that often the theories and frameworks are developed from that demographic. And I think that's why it's been so important for John and I to try and let go as much as possible and let people develop pluralistic ideas in their own ways. And I think if that doesn't happen, then you know, it's not the kind of pluralism that I would certainly want to see. I think we got to have that diversity. And John was saying, like John, I feel optimistic that it's happening and that there's different voices taking on and developing it in their own ways. Thanks, Janie. They're really, really important points. Nadia, did you want to come in and make some points or ask some questions?
Yeah, morning everybody. I feel like we're having a conference in Ibiza right now with this heat. So yeah, actually, Mick, just what you said there about diversity really leads into my question. And as we know, a lot of counselling theory is developed by white males. And then as we trickle down, a lot of therapists are white middle class. And we know that BAME dropout is really high within clients. I guess it was more of a discussion around, we've seen large political movements of injustice with Black Lives Matter. I'm part of groups on Facebook where there's a lot of discussion about the racism the English team faced, against the English players. And I see pluralism as progressive, and I see it as actually, because it's so fluid, it works really well with multiple cultures and people with varying identities and things like that. But I guess I'm going to ask, in terms of that progressiveness, you said there that almost like you feel like you and John should let go, but actually, as leaders and the fathers of pluralism, where is that leadership pluralistic voice in terms of racism, diversity, and encouraging that? And like, what does that voice sound like? And then how do you get that to trickle down to counsellors? We've had the British government say actually racism isn't systematic, but we know that's completely untrue. So, how do you get huge movements like what we're seeing and change in language? How do we get that to our pluralistic counsellors? So when we talk about pluralism, there's almost like a joint effort to tackle such issues.
Thanks, Nadia. I don't know if we've got Richard here, but I mean, one immediate answer to that question is that there is a diversity group within, as a kind of subgroup of the pluralistic community, that's been doing a lot of work and a lot of thinking about the kind of place of diversity in pluralism. Is Richard here?
I am here.
He's just commented.
Rich, did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, can do. Something that was really poignant for us, and something that I think you've raised very perfectly, Nadia, is how important it was to have a diversity group within the pluralistic setting that was a safe space in which people could come, bring their unique minorityness in a place in which we can be with one another while not challenging our own identities, but also that this diversity group in itself, in its safe space, feeds back into the pluralistic steering committee, which is then also endorsed by the forefathers, as they were with Mick and John and Andrew and all the rest of the pluralistic steering committee. So it's very much what you're saying is something that we are working on and wanting to bring all minorities, not just of race and class, but also about first generation, different ages, breaking out these different diversions, because ultimately what we feel is there are many different minorities and many different intersections in which some of us cross many different diversities. However, it's about building doors within these minorities so that we can talk to one another in this space which is welcomed. And anybody that's here at this conference that wants to get in touch and wants to attend this diversity group, please feel free to get in touch with me. I think my email address is in the programme and I'll write it in the chat.
That's great, Rich. Andrew,
I just wanted to add, I think that is really good to ask people to contact you, but there is something definitely about barriers that exist and a way of doing the outreach, which I know is really hard to do, and going out to those communities. But sorry, I'll let Mick.
Yeah, no, thanks, Nadia. It's really, John, did you want to come in here?
Yeah, I think all this is really, really, really important. And I've been thinking about the conference last year. Really had a huge effect on me in kind of, really triggering off serious thinking about these sort of issues that you've raised, Nadia. And I kind of thought that this might come up, like particularly after the discussions yesterday as well. So I've got a set of notes on this that I'll circulate at the end of the discussion. I mean, I think it'd be a distraction to do it right now. I mean, me being a kind of linear, nerdy academic person, this is the way I kind of operate, with kind of reference notes and things. But I think that the if I could just say some things that are kind of spelled out a bit more in these notes. I think that the first thing is, I think, and this was a big discovery for me at the conference last year, I think the pluralistic framework actually has a huge amount to offer for people that are kind of marginalized and come from not the dominant culture and so forth, because everything is negotiated. There isn't a kind of concept of the person within pluralistic that you have to fit into in order to receive the therapy, as there is in kind of CBT. You've got to be a kind of cognitive person or a person-centered. You've got to have a kind of inner feeling state and so on and so forth. I mean, in pluralistic, these kind of ways of thinking might come in or they might not. And the client's way of thinking and the client's preferences based on their life experience and what's helped them and their kind of cultural resources, all these things can come in. So compared to other sources of other types of therapy, I think pluralistic has got a lot to offer. I think then that I think a word you used in your kind of comments just now, Nadia, was outreach. And I think one of the things that kind of needs to happen is people will actually take kind of pluralistic ways of, pluralistic therapy into different situations and into different communities. And I would really, really support that. And then I think also, and the other thing is that in doing that, it will change the therapy. It won't necessarily look the same as it looks in the counselling centre at Abertay University or the clinic at Roehampton. It would be kind of reorganised a bit, or maybe called something different in different settings. I think just the other thing, though, is that I think there's, I also think there's some quite difficult, I suppose, theoretical or conceptual issues to be struggled with, to be worked with in terms of the pluralistic framework. And I think that I think that a lot of the difficult aspects of working across difference between, there's a difference between the client and the therapist in terms of their social identity and background and so on, is that what's happening is unconscious. And it's not just personally unconscious for each person, it's culturally unconscious. So when you take something like white privilege, that's, and you're referring to all the stuff that happened over the football tournament last week and so on. I mean, what we're seeing there is on a mass level, a kind of lack of awareness of this. And I think the way that pluralistic practice is at the moment, it's hard to see how to get into that, within the therapy room. So I think that needs a bit of work. I think just the other thing that I'd like to say about that is that I think some of the answers to this in terms of training courses and so on is actually around understanding what's going on, and that there's more to it. I mean, obviously, becoming personally aware of, one's kind of prejudices or assumptions about oneself and other people and so on is important. But I think it's also important to understand where it all comes from. And where it comes from, I think, is history of colonialism and all sorts of things like that. And I think that I'm not going to go on about this because I could talk about this for ages and ages, but I think one of the difficulties with psychology and with psychotherapy and pluralistic therapy is that the time horizon that it operates within is far too narrow, right? There's a lot of things that are going on in our lives and in our society that are kind of the playing out of things that happened hundreds or even thousands of years ago in terms of development of culture, and have got implications for the future. I mean, like the climate crisis is, I mean, like me and all of us are doing things every day that make the climate crisis worse. You know, we have to buy things wrapped up in plastic and we drive cars and things like that. And I think that up till now, none of that really has been accommodated within therapy theories and so forth. And I talked about this at a conference last year. I'm busy kind of writing about it. But I think actually this is an important part of it, is to have a kind of theoretical understanding of kind of the kind of bigger context of what we're talking about. So that's a bit too much, but anyway.
I mean, there's obviously some, really important issues there, Nadia. Hopefully we'll have more time in the conference to discuss them. I'm just aware of time, so I'm going to move on to Christine. Thanks, Nadia.
Hi, good morning. So I'm quite interested in systemic therapy approaches, and I'm curious what's already been done regarding pluralistic systemic work. So what are your reflections about the difficulties and opportunities of working pluralistically in a systemic way, or so particularly around, negotiating goals or preferences with more people, like for example, families or other social groups, because they could be opposing, and I was just curious to how you'd work with that.
I think that's a really interesting area about pluralistic work with groups and with families and with other systems. And as you say, Christine, there's a complexity, because whereas if you're working with one client, they're likely to have one set of preferences, although even that is often pulling in different directions, that if you've got a group or a family, there's lots of different preferences. And I think then how you work with the preferences across groups and how you negotiate that, or in a group, it's the same, for instance, if you're working pluralistically around training with a student group, how do you work with the different preferences? And I think it's an area that, that just needs more thinking and more development and more kind of work on how you do. So I mean, the book that I did recently with John Norcross on working with client preferences, we don't talk about families or even couples at all, beyond that you look at the individual preferences. I don't know, Christine, before we go on to John, maybe do you have any thoughts on how it applies or how it extends out? To put that back to you.
Well, I'm quite interested in also in things like open dialogue and so on. So I think that in some way that it could kind of relate to that, and that would be an interesting, observing what's happening there to see how that could be transferred into other settings, for example. But yeah, no, I'm just really curious about your reflections.
Do you want to say a bit more about open dialogue, please? People may not be so familiar with that.
Well, what I know about is just work with people who have been maybe diagnosed with psychosis or other problems like that, and the work happens in a setting. So it centers around one person with difficulties, but there's a group of people around them, and they don't have a kind of a fixed way of working with it. It's not like it's necessarily like a medical model as we talked about earlier, but just different people. But there in the open dialogue setting, you would still have it centered around one person's goals and preferences. So I think it's quite different again to other kinds of more systemic works.
Thanks, Christine. John, do you have reflections?
I think there's a huge amount there. I mean, sort of open dialogue is one, and I mean, for me, the descriptions and understanding of dialogue as a kind of way of people being together and interacting with each other, the descriptions that they've come up with, Jaakko Sekula and others have come up with from the group in Finland have hugely influenced me. And I think there's also a kind of huge literature in narrative therapy, lots of examples in narrative therapy. I mean, for example, to go back to sort of Janie's kind of issue about linearity and so on, there's something in narrative therapy that David Denborough and others have developed called the tree of life, which is kind of similar to the kind of case formulation timeline, but is much more creative and it works in, you know, it's been used in groups and things like that. And I think so. I just think there's a huge amount. I mean, I've worked with on various writing projects with Rolf Sunde, who comes from that background, and I've found just a huge amount to learn. I mean, for example, one of my kind of things that I kind of emphasize over and over again is the idea of putting difference to work. And that's completely picked up from Rolf, from a systemic background, because in a family, if there's a difference, like as Mick's saying, you know, the different preferences or different goals for therapy, that difference is what you work with, right? So it's kind of really different, you know, from one-to-one therapy, but it's you know, it has stuff that we can all learn.
Rolf, I don't know, Rolf's here, maybe we can just ask Rolf just a couple of minutes and then we'll go on to Gary. Did you want to say anything about that in relation to pluralism and systemic approaches?
Well, for me, my way into the pluralistic work is that the systemic background has always been connected to difference and diversity and how to handle and be part of diversity. So there's a very clear link, I think, between systemic ways and how systemic therapy is developed into narrative, to dialogical. If you look at Peter Rober's work, for instance, and in Britain you have Jim Wilson's work. For me, it's very clear connections between pluralism and the pluralistic approach and these ways of working with families that grew out of especially Gregory Bateson's work. So I, as a person who's trained in systemic and narrative practice, feel really at home in the pluralistic community, to say that. But you know, it is the main difference for me between individual therapy and family therapy is that one thing is to talk about your mother or father in an individual setting. A completely different thing is to talk about your mother or father when you're sitting beside them. And those two situations demands different kinds of skills, but those skills have related skills in individual work, I think. So for me, the distance is, but it certainly has to, I mean, working with families needs these kinds of skills on how to create, for instance, therapeutic alliance with 5 different people and still be in alliance with yourself. So to me, it's maybe a question of skills also. The philosophical and the theoretical ideas are very much connected.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Rob. There's so much more that we could be talking about, but I wanted to bring in Gary now. Gary, did you want to?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. And thanks for having me here. So I've got a couple of questions and they're quite research led. So I'll try and make it sort of into one. We need to ensure that pluralistic practice is around in 10, 20 years time. And the state of the counselling therapy research field at the moment, particularly with commissioning and things like that, is that the main approaches at the moment have lots of power and lots of dynamic power. And for me, my question is, I guess, is how can we encourage research to be done in the field of pluralism by practitioners and not just full-time academics like myself and others? So how can we make research accessible for practitioners to engage in, to be involved in, to be excited by? And also a second question onto that is which areas might need growing and developing, and sort of, I guess it's a bit of a call to arms really for us all, including myself, to write more, to get more out, and to be brave in that.
Thanks, Gary. John, do you want to take that one, and then we'll come on to finally Andy for the last question?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I just agree. We need to do all these things, and I think that there's, as Kate said earlier on this morning, at some point, I think there's at least 2 groups within the kind of pluralistic network that are kind of working on research, and there's an area on the website, and if you would like to be involved in either of these, that would be really great. I think there's, and I think, I don't know if you were around yesterday evening. I think there was one of the kind of threads in the conversation yesterday was, what kind of research do we need? Do we need randomized clinical trials, or do we need studies that are the client's experience and the client's voice, and so on? And probably need all of these, and others as well. And I think it would be useful to have a statement of a kind of pluralistic view, a pluralistic perspective on the type of evidence that we think is relevant. I mean, the reason I say that is that I think there's lots of people, not just therapists, have got reservations about randomized clinical trials. However, you mentioned sort of commissioning bodies and so on, who have spent the last 20 years or so basing their kind of expenditures and decisions on evidence from randomized trials, and you can't just take that away. You've got to offer them something else. So I think it would be useful for us to have a kind of position statement and that on what we think the kind of evidence could be. And I would imagine that therapists from other backgrounds would join us in that and would welcome something like that. And I would hope that would be one of the next tasks for the pluralistic research group. So there's, maybe you could contribute to that yourself. I think the other thing that's been discussed quite a lot in the kind of the group that meets monthly is the notion of a practice research network or practitioner research network. And we've kind of skirted around that. And kind of at the moment are kind of trying to use the website as a kind of like a networking facility that people can communicate with each other. And I'm not sure that's been entirely successful. But I think there's a lot can be done with a well-organized network of practitioners who will collect data on their own clients. And I think that, I think possibly Bill Andrews is at the conference today, and he and the Human Givens Network, they've done that really, really well. And I don't see why we couldn't do something like that. So in other words, that's a kind of research that, mix recent randomized controlled trial of persons that have done counselling for young people cost like an enormous amount of money, right? And it's very difficult to get an enormous amount of money. And I suspect that's going to be harder in the future as health budgets and research budgets get pressurized by all the costs of the pandemic and things like that. But there are things you can do on a very limited budget, on almost like crowdfunding of lots and lots of people given bits of their time or even bits of money and so forth. So I think,
John, there's even those that work in academia, there's even internal budgets and things that we can try and access.
yes.
For me, it was around how can we mobilize. So I work at Edge Hill University, and it's how can we mobilize the internal resources, but then include everyone else as well, the practitioners around. So almost having hubs, pluralistic hubs around the country set up in the universities that might be able to sort of act as a almost like a gatekeeper for practitioners to then join and be part of that research as well. Maybe that's a pipe dream, but that's something.
Gary, I think that, sorry to interrupt, I think that would be a great question for the research group. I'm just aware of the time, and
yeah.
I wanted to bring in Andy before we finish this slot at 10:30. Thanks, Gary. Thanks so much for your question.
Thank you. Cheers.
Discussion will continue. Andy, do you want to come off mute? Yeah, great.
Cheers, mate. Yeah, my background, I do a lot of work in community mental health in a third sector organisation, and John sort of alluded to, you said the word outreach, and I wonder if it ties in somewhat with this question, which is that if, as part of the collaborative revolution, pluralism was to break free from the therapy room, what might that look like? Who might be affected by that? What differences might it make? And what might be some of the obstacles that it would encounter?
John, 3 minutes.
Wait a minute, just if it was to break free of what? So say that again, Andy.
If it was to break free of the therapy room, so if pluralistic therapy was to break free of the therapy room, what would it look like?
Well, I'm deeply in favour of it breaking free of the therapy room, and I mean, I've been involved in writing and research and practice around outdoor therapy, nature therapies, walk and talk therapies, and so on. And also around what I would call embedded counselling, so counselling skills used by teachers and social workers and nurses and GPs and things like that. And I think there's loads of things like that. And I think the way I would look at it is that if you take the skill set of a therapist, how can the skill set and the knowledge and experience of a therapist be used? It doesn't necessarily have to be in a room with, a label on the door, counsellor or psychotherapist. And I mean, you mentioned what would be gained and what would be lost. And I think there would be, I can't answer that off the top of my head. Undoubtedly, there would be things gained and lost, but it's hard to see how the core tradition of kind of one-to-one therapy in rooms is going to vanish anytime soon. I mean, so that will be there for a long time. But I think another kind of outreach thing is like something that's kind of deeply scary to me as an old person, but it's apps. I mean, people are using apps for all sorts of things and monitoring their own mental health and things like this. So, yeah, I think there's lots of examples, and I think pluralism is sufficiently flexible to take advantage of all that.
Thanks, John. Well, we are up to time. Thanks so much for all the people who are asking questions. Sorry, there was so much more we could have talked about on each of those, and I know some people had their hands up to ask more questions, but hopefully we'll have time to address it all. And I think, as a number of people have been saying, Rich and others, there's a number of kind of subgroups in the pluralistic community. We have a kind of overall steering group that people are very welcome to become part of, and I know Andrew's very keen to open that up. Maybe he'll say more at some point. But also there's lots of kind of different groups working on things, so do please get involved. So I think, Andrew, am I handing back to you at this point, or
John? I think Mick.
John. Okay.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, welcome back into the main room, and well done for getting into your breakout rooms and into your workshops. That's fantastic. So yeah, great job. We are just about to recreate the breakout rooms for after the break. So you might want to just hold your coffee just for another moment or two while Sebastian remakes the rooms. Once he does that, you might want to jump into your room of choice and then go and make your cuppa. And definitely, Rolf, we're going to help you do that as well. So, so Sebastian, just when you've remade the rooms 1 to 7, just let us know. Good. So I'm just going to double check that set.
You are coming from any specific therapeutic modality that you prefer, and also would be curious if you have ever practiced an instrument or a sport, because that's going to come in a little bit in what we're going to talk about. So anyone who wants to share on the chat, feel free to do so. I guess I don't have to write it. Based on my background, you can guess a little bit my background. Thank you, Mary Claire.
And is this the moment, Kate, where you say all your wonderful things?
I think it might be. I feel like we're drifting into the talk without me getting to say my thing.
It sounds like such a great introduction, but it's, yeah, let's make sure you
start. I get my moment, right? Thank you.
Please, Kate, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so welcome back everyone from the break. This is our keynote part of the day, and we have two wonderful speakers with us today who obviously we're already chatting to. So I first came across deliberate practice when my colleague Julia McLeod attended. This is my dog who's it's going so badly. Okay, so I first came across deliberate practice when Julie McLeod attended the Society for Psychotherapy Research Conference in Amsterdam in 2018. And she was pretty wowed by a presentation and a demonstration of deliberate practice by Tony Romanier and Alexandra Vaz, apologies for my pronunciation, particularly their training video with the flirty client. Which I am yet to see, but very intrigued by. Following that event, deliberate practice has been incorporated into our MSc in Pluralistic Counselling and has become an integral part of the programme. This development has been enthusiastically received by the staff and by the students, and has also become the focus of an ongoing programme of research. Tony Romanier is a clinical psychologist and psychodynamic psychotherapist who lives in Seattle and is a faculty member at the University of Washington, as well as running a private practice as a therapist and supervisor, and being involved in deliberate practice training and research initiatives in universities and clinics all around the world. He's the author of Mastering the Inner Skills of Psychotherapy, a deliberate practice handbook, and Deliberate Practice for Psychotherapists, a guide to improving clinical effectiveness. He's also the co-author and editor of more than 40 books, book chapters, and journal articles. His co-presenter today, Alexandra Vaz, currently works at the University Institute in Lisbon, Portugal. He's a clinical psychologist, teacher, and psychotherapy researcher. As well as research into deliberate practice, his research interests include the therapist interpersonal skills and persuasiveness, memory reconsolidation, and psychotherapy integration. He's editor of the newsletter of the International Society for the Exploration of Psychotherapy Integration, SEPI is the familiar acronym, as well as being the organizer of its annual conference. In any spare time left over from these roles, he hosts webinars for the Society of Psychotherapy Research and founded Psychotherapy Experts Talk, in which he interviewed leading psychotherapy practitioners and researchers. Together, Tony and Alex have recently set up the Deliberate Practice Institute, and on behalf of the American Psychological Association, are editing a series of books on deliberate practice and psychotherapy training. Deliberate practice is increasingly recognized as an essential element in therapist training and lifelong learning, and it has the potential to make a significant positive contribution to client outcomes. Alex and Tony are the two leading world figures in this movement, and we're extremely fortunate in being able to have the opportunity to learn from them today. Their workshop, is titled Reaching for Clinical Expertise, Deliberate Practice in Psychotherapy, and I am really pleased to welcome them to our conference, and will hand you over just now.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you, Kate.
I want to say that I've been a huge fan personally of John McLeod and Julie McLeod's work for a long time, and Mick Cooper is a dear friend, so we're really happy, to be here. I think, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, even though it's really nice to hear such nice things about us, we're going to say everything with a huge grain of salt. We don't want to be selling anything, basically. Like, everything we're going to talk about is quite preliminary, and we really want to encourage research on it, taking it apart and finding what works and what doesn't. From Tony's nodding, I suppose.
Yeah, this is really important, because our field can sometimes get very excited about, new models or new this or new that. And this is, we are very excited, especially like results from Abertay were very exciting, but we're at a very early stage in terms of deliberate practice, understanding how it works, how it can help, how it may not help. We should come keep an open, skeptical mind, even sometimes, at least curious. So.
I think you'll find it's quite pluralistic, though. And just to give you a preview of coming events, so Tony is going to be, for the most part, at the helm of the chat while I'm doing the beginning intro on deliberate practice today. So as I'm talking, feel free to either, stop me because we get excited and we just talk away, but also feel very free to put any questions on the chat room. And Tony will be always responding to that as I'm talking away. And then we're going to make things a little bit more experiential. And we're going to invite you guys to actually do a little bit of deliberate practice with us. We have some video clips for you to practice. Don't worry, you're going to be muted, so you're in the safe space for practice, but just to get a little bit of the experiential edge of what we're going to be talking about. And of course, Tony, feel free to add anything you want along the way. All right. So I guess out of all the things that Kate said about what we've been doing, one of the main things that we are very proud to be part of is we're editing a book series for the American Psychological Association called The Essentials of Deliberate Practice. So deliberate practice, as we're going to describe, is a method for training, basically, a systematic training methodology. And we've been, and with many other very talented colleagues, we've been trying to translate those methods into specific skill building exercises for different models. And so our book series is, I would say, a little bit of an ambitious one in that we're working with experts from different models, and we're for the first time developing very concrete, discrete skill building exercises that can be practicable in a routine fashion. And we're very happy that actually the first book in the series, the Deliberate Practice in Emotion-Focused Therapy, the lead author is Rhonda Goldman, one of the main figures in emotion-focused therapy. This book just came out, I would say, like 1 month ago, 2 months ago, something like that. So it's fresh off the presses. And in late September this year, the Deliberate Practice in Cognitive Behavioral Therapy will be out. And since we're talking about it, there are 6 other books currently being developed, and we're working with experts from different fields in order to develop deliberate practice exercises across different therapeutic modalities. And you can see there, we are very, very lucky to be working with people that we admire, from leading research and practitioners from the field. And it's been a really interesting combination of expertises because these people know a lot about their models, and we're just trying to help them translate their expertise into something that can be practicable even at the very early beginning levels of training. So these are adequate exercises for graduate students, I would say even undergraduate students, that they can do it by themselves or with the help of a teacher or supervisor. So a bunch of what we're going to be showing you is kind of also based on this. And we're actually later in this talk, we're actually going to be doing some exercises from the Emotion-Focused Therapy book. So the first question, just to answer, why is this relevant for psychotherapists? A major question that has been, let's say, plaguing the field for a long time is, do therapists improve over time? And improve is, of course, a kind of a vague term, so we'll pin it down to, are therapists getting more effective client outcomes as they increase in their experience, years of experience? And over 50 years of research seem to give us a very conclusive, very definitive answer, which is not reliably. So what we mean is that some therapists do get better client outcomes over time. Others do not. So they stall. They kind of get the same outcomes across different years of experience. And some actually deteriorate, usually slightly, over time. And this is only one example of one such study. It's a particularly robust study, but there are many other examples from our very good friend Simon Goldberg. They tracked the outcomes of up to 170 therapists to up to 18 years, and they found a small effect size, or actually, if you were going to round it up together, on average, therapists got slightly less effective over time. Now, of course, some got better, some got less effective, some just stalled. But this is just to kind of give a warning that just counting on years of work experience may not be enough for you to become a better clinician or counselor over time. And although this might be a bit disheartening or controversial for us to take in, it's kind of a hard pill to swallow. It's interesting that it's one of those things where even if it's controversial maybe in our field, it's something that has been researched and found in many different professional fields. And there's actually a term for it. So deliberate practice researchers, or researchers on expertise, professional expertise across different fields, different professions, have discovered that we are all prone to a phenomena called arrested development. Arrested development is a phenomena where if you don't put in a very specific type of effort in getting better over time, what ends up happening is that you get a burst of effectiveness, a burst of professional expertise in the first few months or years of your professional career. So for example, everyone I think knows this. If you're starting out with an instrument, if you want to learn how to cook, if you want to be a counselor, usually in the first like 1-2 years of practice, you can get quite better quite fast, even without a lot of assistance. What ends up happening is that after that, it's easy to plateau, to basically get stuck in your effectiveness. And that's called arrested development. Now, what these deliberate practice researchers also found is that, very interestingly, there was a subset of people who did not get stuck in arrested development. They actually kept increasing their professional expertise over time, even after 10, 20, 30 years of professional experience. So a lot of these researchers try to understand what accounts for this subset of people who go on to develop expert performance or professional expertise. What distinguishes them from the rest of us that easily get stuck in arrested development? And so that's part of what we're going to answer today in this talk. The major book you're seeing here, the Cambridge Handbook of Expertise and Expert Performance, is one of the main references for the kind of research that we're going to be describing today. The main author of these books and research is K. Anders Ericsson, who unfortunately passed away recently last year. And this book, Peak, is kind of a layman's version of this kind of research. But basically what they found across multiple fields, be it music, sports, chess, medicine, surgeons, is that there were a subset of principles, methods that these professionals did reliably over time that accounted for their continual development. In other words, it seems that even independent of which professional field you're working on, there are certain principles of learning, of procedural learning, that seem to account to the development of professional expertise. So what we've been doing, and it's not just, of course, Tony and myself, there's a large number of people, increasingly large number of people, and we've heard from Julia and very talented colleagues also in this conference. We're trying to translate this kind of research into counseling and psychotherapy and see if this might be useful for our purposes of bettering psychotherapy training and supervision. And I'm also very happy to say that there's a recent burst of research on the topic. So this table you're seeing here are only recent publications on either counseling or psychotherapy regarding deliberate practice, right? And if you want full access to these references, and you can see there's Julia's last contribution here at the end of the table. If you want to get access to this, there's this website that we developed called the Deliberate Practice Institute. So it's dp4therapists.com. If you go to this website and there's a tab called resources, you will find a listing of all of these research papers, and we're always updating these. And going back to the first remark that we made, if anyone's interested, and if anyone has students they need, a master's thesis on, doctoral thesis on, this is a great opportunity because it's very early on and we still need to learn a lot about the deliberate practice as applied to counseling and psychotherapy. Okay, so I've been talking about this, but so what is the deliberate practice, or how is it different from, let's say, traditional other types of training? So the main difference, or one of the main differences I want to highlight, is that there is a big difference between declarative learning and procedural learning. Declarative learning is the kind of passive learning that is included, for example, in when you're reading and consuming knowledge through that, memorizing some sort of theory, for example, when you go to lectures, or right now when you're listening to me, when you go to a workshop or whatever. Right now we're doing declarative learning. I am giving you some sort of information and you're processing it. This, of course, is fundamental. But what also the deliberate practice researchers have found is that it is not enough for continuous development of professional expertise. There's another type of knowledge called procedural knowledge. You can call it the knowledge that's in your bones, almost at an unconscious level in your body. And this type of knowledge cannot be easily learned by passive learning methods, such as reading, attending lectures. The kind of procedural knowledge we're talking about, in a way, has to put your body in it. You actually have to do it in order to learn it. So if you're trying to learn the piano, for example, the best way to actually get some procedural learning is to actually get your hands on the piano, right? And we would argue that our field has done a lot of efforts in providing resources for declarative learning. There are thousands of great books on psychotherapy and counseling theory and research, but there is seldom resources on implementing procedural learning, and you're actually trying out things in a safe space so that you can not just think about counseling and psychotherapy, but can actually try it out and perfect it and refine it over time. So deliberate practice is a way to augment our traditional, more declarative type of learnings with more procedural type of methods. Moreover, and this is a simplification of what the deliberate practice is about, but if we're just focusing on the procedural element, and let's imagine that you're a teacher or supervisor and you're thinking, how could I implement the deliberate practice with my students or with my supervisees? There are three main tasks that we would argue that you'd have to do. One would be to establish a skill deficit, meaning some area of your trainees' performance that probably you and them find is lacking. Now, what's interesting is that, this hopefully is a very collaborative endeavor. You're kind of finding out with them, hopefully through objective means such as watching their videotapes or audio tapes of real sessions. But you can also assume skill deficits for your students. I mean, if you have undergraduate students or graduate students, it's probably safe to assume that they don't have a huge competency in empathic skills, in repairing alliance ruptures, whatever it is, because they've never gone through it. It's kind of the same if I've never played the piano, you can kind of assume that I have a skill deficit in playing scales, right? So it can go both ways. You can assume as a teacher, or you can collaboratively explore, if you're talking to a already seasoned professional in trying to establish a very specific skill deficit for that person. From there, we try to develop a small learning goal. And I want to highlight the idea of small. A learning goal is fairly easy to understand. So it's trying to translate the skill deficit into something that now we want to try to obtain. What's the skill that we want to try to get at, to be able to do better? The problem is that our field usually loves broad concepts, such as the therapeutic relationship or therapeutic alliance. And although these are very important concepts, they are very hard to transform into something that's practicable. So in order for something to be practicable, you've got to nail it down to the littlest chunk possible. And that's what we would call a small learning goal, where you're really trying to pinpoint what are the verbal and nonverbal behaviors that you're trying to help the trainee get better at, right? It's a level of abstraction that usually in a lot of psychotherapy and counseling training is not addressed so much. And funnily enough, when we work with our book authors for this book series, this is the initial part that we need to work out the most with them, because they are experts in a lot of different therapeutic models, but to talk at this very concrete level of, you know, what's the exact verbal and nonverbal things that you're wanting to get your trainees to get better at is a level of abstraction that, again, is not usually talked about. And finally, and I guess this is the meat of the little practice, is the behavior rehearsal. So we don't want to just talk about our skill deficits or talk about our learning goals, but we want to actually do some behavior rehearsal to actually try out skills as if I'm with a client, in our case, as if I'm with a therapy client right now. And behavior rehearsal should include ideally expert feedback. So I'm always with someone who's kind of refining my interventions, giving me very concrete feedback on my performance, and adjusting the difficulty of the exercise so that I'm more likely to get something out of the practice. Again, there's a lot of stuff in this. We could go into a lot more depth into each of these principles, but I just want to give you a very broad overview so you get the gist of it. And the last principle I just want to share with you before I show you a little bit of what I'm talking about, because I'm actually going to show you a clip of a little DP demonstration, is just this other principle, which is that deliberate practice uses simulation-based methods. There's actually a whole line of research called simulation-based mastery learning. And basically what it means is creating a context where you're simulating the work environment. So for example, if you want to learn counseling skills, we want to find ways to simulate as if you're in a counseling session right now so you can practice counseling skills. And I'm going to show you what I find to be a funny example. This is how simulation-based methods exist in other fields. And sometimes they are quite developed. In medicine, simulation-based methods are quite developed. And here's an example in aviation.
Okay, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, looking down the runway, I'm gonna push the throttles up. I would announce 100 knots. We're gonna call V1. So my hands would come off the throttles. Go ahead and start pulling back. There you go, don't be afraid of it. There you go. And then there's a positive rate and the gear's coming up.
Okay, so it's not an actual plane, but this $20 million simulator is an exact replica of an A320 cockpit. And the technology inside of it makes it even more complex than the plane itself.
We use our training devices to train our pilots from day one. We can simulate in this particular device anything that we want the crews to experience in the operation.
Okay, so a couple things to highlight there. So they're using this kind of procedural simulation from day one. So from day one, they're both doing declarative learning, but also this kind of procedural learning. And you'll notice that the pilot is giving very specific instructions based on the simulation, right? Okay, now put your hand here, try this, and really forcing the person to actually put their body into the activity and getting very concrete feedback on their performance ongoingly.
Okay.
So that's what we've tried to do for psychotherapy skills. And so I was telling you about the first book in our book series for APA. And what we did is we invited the experts from different models to come up with a list of 12 skills that they think that everyone interested in that therapeutic model should be able to try and practice, or should be able to do with some level of competency. You're going to see that we also divided this color coding here. Out of these 12 skills, these are the 12 skills that are in the emotion-focused therapy book. We have 4 beginning skills, 4 intermediate skills, and 4 hard or advanced skills. And so these are skills that Rhonda Goldman, the first author, labeled as skills that anyone interested in emotion-focused therapy should be able to practice and would benefit from practicing. And you can see that because it's emotion-focused therapy, there's a lot of emphasis on empathic kinds of interventions. So there's empathic understanding, affirmation, explorations, evocations. We learned a lot from doing this first book, both on the strengths and the limitations of the little practice, at least the way we're now trying to do it. Whereas there were some skills that, you know, we got consistently positive feedback and the exercises seemed to work out very well, while we totally bombed in trying to do other kinds of exercises. Stuff that was very complex and nuanced and took a lot of back and forth really didn't fit this kind of method of the little practice, at least in the way that we're currently trying to do it. So we try to keep things as simple and as concrete as possible. And frankly, we found that things that for a lot of people might sound overly simple never turned out to be that way. So students always thought either it was a good challenge or often it felt like too hard a challenge. So it's good for us to mentalize our students and remember that for someone starting out, actually just starting at the very beginning inch of trying an empathic intervention can be a huge deal, right? And just one last thing before I show you a clip. One cool aspect about this project is that although there's a bunch of offers, actually there are even more offers that are also credited in the books, in that these little practice exercises that we develop, we are actually testing them around the world. So what we do is we write with the authors of the little practice exercise to try out a specific skill building exercise. And then we ship out these exercises to different training sites that volunteer around the world. And we're up to 14 countries and 5 continents. We've done more than 150 tests by now. And what we ask people to do is to try out doing the little practice exercise as we've written it, and to send us back a videotape recording of them doing that exercise. And from that recording, we review the recording and we see, did this skill building exercise work? Is it too hard? Is there something we need to change? And so we learned a lot from actually trial and error and seeing, you know, that a lot of instructions that we came up maybe didn't work, we had to tweak. And so kudos to everyone who's helped us in making these books better. All right, Tony, before we move to the first video, anything you want to add?
Oh, that was great.
All right, I think we're doing good with time. Cool. So this is a brief video I'm about to show you. So on this bottom right corner here, this is Rhonda Goldman, the first author of the first book, the Emotion Focused Therapy book. And what she's going to demonstrate is a very small demo of one skill building exercise from the book. And she has with her 2 trainees, and these are end of graduate trainees, so they're not total beginners, as you'll see, but you'll see how Rhonda guides them through the process. All right.
So today, Megan Emsley and Zoe Goldstein are going to help us to demonstrate how you do deliberate practice in emotion-focused therapy. And we're going to zero in on one particular skill, which is the empathic affirmation and validation skill. So the empathic affirmation and validation skill is one where the therapist offers the client a high degree of affirmation and validation, as it sounds, and basically communicates through their words that this is very understandable and that the therapist is there to support the client in this moment. And this is what we would do if we were doing this deliberate practice, is we'd make sure to highlight the skill criteria. So let me just say what they are. So first of all, therapist responses capture the depth and intensity of present experiencing of client. Therapist responses deepen and affirm, but do not speculate or push beyond client current experiencing, which is different than some of the other empathic responses. And therapist makes sure to use a soft, gentle, but affirming voice. So now we're going to have, Zoe's going to play the client, and she's going to offer a prompt or a statement as a client might. And Megan is going to demonstrate offering an empathic affirmation. Okay. So when you guys are ready, I think you have the prompt. So go ahead, Zoe, you start.
I just can't believe the direction our country is taking right now. Watching the news makes me so angry.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really upsetting for you. Everything that's happening right now, it's really upsetting for you.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to actually ask you to just do that. Try it again. Same thing, try it again. And Megan, you can improvise as you see fit, right?
Okay.
So
I just can't believe the direction our country is taking right now. Watching the news makes me so angry.
Yeah, I hear that you're feeling really angry, and there's just so much that's happening for you right now.
okay, all right, good. How did that feel, Megan? How did that feel for you?
I feel like the second time I understood a bit more that feeling of anger. I think seeing it again and like kind of channeling into that piece of that upsetness for Zoe helped doing it the second time.
Okay, so you feel like you were able to sort of almost like be more present the second time with the emotional tone behind what she was saying?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay, yeah, because I agree. I mean, I think the first time was a little bit more kind of rote, and then like the second time had more of you behind it, more of your presence, and your voice softened a little bit and slowed down a little bit too. So that's really good. All right, so let's try another one, another client prompt.
I accidentally hit a pedestrian while driving the other day. The weather was bad and the sun was in my eyes, so I couldn't see him, and he was taken to the hospital with broken bones, and I feel so guilty.
It sounds like it was really hard for you. It sounds like there was a lot going on. Now you're having all these feelings, all these things that happened to you.
Okay, great. Okay, take a breath. and actually, just if you don't mind, do the same thing again. Zoe, you play client. Megan, you're the therapist.
So I accidentally hit a pedestrian while driving the other day, and the weather was bad and the sun was in my eyes, so I just couldn't see him, and he was taken to the hospital with broken bones, and I feel so guilty.
Yeah, I'm picking up on this sense of guilt, and it seems like things were kind of out of control for you in that moment.
Okay. So, okay, again, so let me ask you, Megan, how does it feel? How do you feel between the first and the second time?
Yeah, I definitely felt like, as you were saying in the first one, more present with kind of that emotion that Zoe was presenting, and feeling that sense of like, it seemed really overwhelming for her in that moment with the guilt. So I think I could attune to that a bit more.
Okay, the second time around, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I think even the first time around, I feel like you were more present, right? And yeah, and I think like I experienced you also, and in the last couple of responses, I've experienced you, Megan, as like very present and very attentive. And then it's just a matter of maybe softening your voice a little bit.
Okay.
And that's okay. So thank you so much. It's really valuable to have you actually try it and demonstrate it and show us how it's done. So, and you did a great job, both of you.
I'm seeing there's a lot of great questions popping up as we're discussing these things. I just want to highlight, and then I'll pass it to Tony and we can discuss a little bit of those questions before moving on. Just to highlight a little bit on what you saw, some differences between, let's say, more traditional therapist or counselor training and supervision and something that's a little bit more deliberate practice informed. So in a lot of training and supervision, the trainer's feedback is often based on the trainee's self-report. So they might bring some idea of what their client said, and it's often focused on something outside of the therapist's performance. So trainee might come in and they might start discussing client formulation, theory of a model. And again, we are not saying either or. These are all very important things, clearly. How DP might augment this is by having a very concrete focus on the trainee's performance, its current strengths and deficits, as observed through recordings or in vivo rehearsal. So we're really focusing here specifically on the performance, right? And because it's easy and it's very evocative to be focusing on our performance, the temptation might be to go out of that focus and start just talking about theory and talking about clients. And part of the discipline here is going back to us and our focus. And part of the discipline of the trainer is also gently, compassionately keeping a focus on trainees' performance. Often, the trainees' feedback in more traditional types of training might lead to devising conceptual learning goals, such as, you should read more about this or learn more about that, or broad clinical goals. Whereas in deliberate practice, we're trying to really devise performance-oriented small learning goals. And you found, for example, in Rhonda's comment, at a certain point, she says, well, this was good. Maybe you could have softened your voice. It's a very concrete thing. And if now we were to see a continuation of this practice, probably what would happen is try again and try doing the exact same thing, but try softening your voice. So you could be refining the performance minute by minute in a very nuanced way over time.
Alex?
Yeah, please, Tony.
We've had a lot of great questions.
I'm seeing that
in the chat,
yeah.
So keep them coming. Mike just raised one that I want to. Mike Shallcross raised a really important question that I want to address, where he said, "Does it assume that there is one best way of handling a specific situation? And if so, is that pluralistic?" And this is a really important point. So no, we do not assume there's one right way of doing therapy. And it's going to be different for each therapist, for each client, even for each session. And our goal is not to turn trainees into robots where they've memorized a specific thing and they do it robotically, but rather to give trainees an opportunity to experiment, to stretch, to explore, to discover their own style. Now they're going to, be getting feedback from supervisor or peers, but that doesn't mean they have to internalize that feedback. They could be like, well, that sounds great for you, but my style is actually quite different. And what's cool is they are discovering their style experientially. Because I'll tell you, by my third year of graduate school, I had a very well developed style of therapy theoretically. I could tell you all kinds of nuances to my therapy as long as it was theoretical, and I was just telling you about it. Or if you read my papers about my therapy, you'd be like, whoa, Tony's really developed his style of therapy. But if you watched videos of me doing therapy, it was quite different. And the difference was because I wasn't having opportunity to rehearse. I was having lots of opportunity to talk about therapy and write about therapy and think about therapy. So that's where all my creative development was going. And so if we can give trainees the opportunity to rehearse as much as possible, we really think trainees will become more nuanced and more individualistic and more pluralistic.
I mean, I think that's the perfect segue, Tony, if you would like to introduce our more experiential practice now.
Great. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into an exercise. These are exercises that are on our website, dpfortherapists.com. You can see it down in the bottom right. And they're free to use for yourselves, for your trainees, in class, in supervision, however you want. And these are all appropriate for trainees, but we've also had a lot of therapists tell us, like licensed, experienced therapists tell us that they're useful. So this first exercise is on empathic understanding. And what we're going to ask you to do is to try to perform the following 2 skill criteria. Accurately reflect the core meaning or feeling behind the client's statements, and use a tentative exploratory tone. Now we're going to show you a video of an actor. This is not a real client, but this is an actor playing a client. And then we're going to ask you to perform these skill criteria. And we want you to do it out loud. Okay, we don't want you to just think it or write it. Make sure you're muted. You can have your video off if you want. but try to perform it out loud. Because with deliberate practice, we want to practice as we perform. Okay, let's go, Alex.
My daughter recently left for college. And my husband died last year. I'm all alone at home. I really feel sad and lonely.
All right, great. So let's try it again. One of the principles of deliberate practice is we want to repeat. So can we just see the skill criteria one more time, Alex? So again, this is what we're asking you to do. I'll give you a moment to read it here. And let's do the video again.
My daughter recently left for college. And my husband died last year. I'm all alone at home. I really feel sad and lonely.
Great. Great. So let's move on to the next one.
Same exercise.
So again, we're going to do this now with another video. Now you notice we are not demonstrating, oh, this is the right way to do empathic understanding, right? Because there is no one right empathic understanding response. This is about you exploring your style, pushing your skill threshold. So we're going to do the exact same skill criteria, but with a different video this time.
My previous therapist asked me a lot about my feelings, and to me, it never really helped. You know, I remember one time getting so upset that she actually had to call an ambulance and I had to go to the hospital. So if it's okay with you, I would rather not talk about my feelings.
Great. Some people experience this video as a little harder. So let's try it again.
My previous therapist asked me a lot about my feelings, and to me, it never really helped. You know, I remember one time getting so upset that she actually had to call an ambulance and I had to go to the hospital. So if it's okay with you, I would rather not talk about my feelings.
Great. All right. So what we're going to do now is you are personally, privately, going to complete this form. This is a deliberate practice reaction form. And we're going to do question number 1 first. How challenging was it for you to fulfill the skill criteria in these exercises? You can actually answer it differently for each exercise if you want, for each video if you want. And now number 2, did you have any reactions in the good challenge category? So that's the yellow category, or in the too hard categories. Now you notice we're asking this as a yes, no question, right? We're not asking you to explicitly expose your personal reactions. Now, the reason why is, you know, there's a great comment earlier in the chat about how it's important for supervisors, professors to be aware of how vulnerable trainees can feel. And particularly with deliberate practice, I mean, this is true for any therapy training, but particularly deliberate practice can feel very vulnerable because we're asking trainees to not just talk about therapy, which many of them are good at doing, but just actually perform it in simulation, which is a lot harder. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to help trainees discover their own, what we call zone of proximal development. So this is a zone where it's not too easy, not too hard, it's just right in the middle for a good challenge. If you have any of the reactions in the good challenge category, that's a good sign. If there's anything in the too hard category, or you rated either of the videos above an 8, that often means that it's just too hard. Now, there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's very personal. It has to do with your, personal reactions, your countertransference, whatever you want to call it, your life history. It's just about kind of flushing out your own strengths, your own weaknesses. Something we often tell trainees is, us knowing your inner world will not help you be a better therapist. Us, meaning the supervisor, me, knowing your inner world will not help you be a better therapist when you're sitting with your client. But you, the trainee, knowing your inner world will help you be a better therapist when you're sitting with your client. So it's about helping the trainees gain more self-awareness and really more ownership over their training process. Now, if you look at the bottom boxes at the bottom of the screen, if you just follow the instructions, if the exercise was too easy, you move to a harder video. If it was the right level of challenge or good challenge, you actually repeat it. And this often surprises people. People are often like, oh, well, it was a good challenge, so I move on. No. If it's a good challenge, you keep repeating it. And if it's too hard, you step it back. Great.
I just want to say that for everyone interested, like these videos, the reaction form, that's all for free on the website, on these books that we put out, that's all in there in case you want to use any of these for your purposes. So I'm actually going to move away. I'll come back to this later, Tony, because I think it would be good to keep the ball rolling with the practice. So would you present this one?
Great. So we're going to jump into another exercise here. This is addressing ruptures and facilitating repair. Now, some people find this exercise to be more challenging, but again, I want to emphasize some people. There's wide variety, and this is about you or each trainee discovering their own zone of proximal development. So here's the 3 skill criteria we're going to ask you to do with these videos. First, express appreciation for the client's disclosure. Second, convey empathy, validation, or accountability. And then third, respond with a question or statement that invites the client to discuss their subjective experience related to the rupture. And Alex, if you have these slides here, maybe we could copy that into the chat window, just so people have it there and they can see it. Or here, I can do it. I think I see it here. You got it? Here, Alex, I can do it. Oh, you got it too. Okay, great.
To be honest, I don't see the point of talking about my mother. That was a painful relationship. I don't want to remember it.
All right. See how that felt? Sorry, I copied the wrong thing into the chat, so I'm going to copy the correct thing. Alex had copied the correct thing. Here we go. So we're going to do it again. All right?
So expressing
appreciation.
Video. Yeah. Express appreciation for the client's disclosure, convey empathy, validation, and accountability, and respond with a question or statement that invites the client to discuss their subjective experience related to the rupture. Right? Let's try it again.
To be honest, I don't see the point of talking about my mother. That was a painful relationship. I don't want to remember it.
All right. Great. Let's do the reaction form again.
Yes. Hey, there you go.
Okay. So first of all, answer the first question. How challenging was it to fulfill the skill criteria? And then note if you had any reactions in the good challenge category or too hard category. And you would use this to determine whether to keep repeating the same video or pick a different video. Should we do the next video, Alex, or how do you want to proceed here?
Let's do one more video and then we can, because we want to leave some time for discussion as well.
Yeah.
So let's just do one more, again, same exercise, right? Expressing appreciation, conveying empathy, and then a question to invite the client to discuss their subjective experience. Let's do this final one.
This is uncomfortable to ask, but are you interested in me romantically? Last week when I told you about that random guy that I met at a bar, you just asked me a lot of questions about my dating history. Are you interested in me like that?
Great. Let's do the reaction form one last time, Alex. Okay, so first of all, how challenging was it to fulfill the skill criteria for this video? And then did you have any other reactions in the good challenge or too hard? Now we will ask trainees to be filling out this reaction form throughout the whole time they're practicing. We never want to get too far from this because we want to be constantly assessing, is it getting easier? Is it getting harder? And I am personally surprised all the time. I can't predict. Because sometimes it almost starts out kind of like, oh, it's a 4 or 5, it's not that bad. But then as the trainee gets into it, the actual countertransference, all the stuff starts emerging within the trainee and it actually feels harder. And other times it gets easier over time, so.
Yeah, I'll just jump in, Tony, and I'll say this. Out of all the tests we've done and us implementing this kind of methods, one thing that's always been surprising to me is how much people learn about themselves while doing these skill building exercises. So even if the exercise is completely, let's say, a technical skill they're working on with a client that's actually an actor and it's not their clients, the repeated practice of putting this stuff into words usually triggers a lot of personal memories, emotions, or you might just find out your own mannerisms and your own ways of talking. I've learned a lot about myself doing this kind of work. So don't be surprised if that comes up as well.
There's some comments I want to address here. So MT said it's surprisingly tiring even doing these wee exercises. Yes. When I started doing this, I was trying to do like an hour a day or whatever, and that was just like completely crazy and like not sustainable and not healthy. Like 20 minutes is often like a lot, especially if it's just you in the video. If there's a pair or multiple pairs, it kind of breaks it up a bit. So it's important to not overdo it and not ask your trainees to overdo it. And so, yeah, Madeline said that I'm sorry, we don't always provide enough time for you to put your full response into words, and we definitely don't want to rush you. So yeah, all the exercises are available on the website, so you can really take your time, explore your personal style. So that's the best way to do that. And Tess also said, as it's been used with neurodivergent therapists, it takes a bit longer to process. And yes, absolutely. The goal with deliberate practice is to really meet each trainee, each therapist where they're at, which can be quicker, it can be slower, it can be whatever it is. So we're, working with a large group, and part of the issue here is with Zoom, we can't see you and see like, are you still responding? If we were in person, it would be, a bit different. So I'm sorry if we're moving too quickly or too slowly for you. But we really encourage you to kind of do this on the website, and just so you can really fine tune it for yourself. Or if you're working with a supervisor, consultant, or coach, to give them that feedback, to tell them like, look, I want more time, or I want this, or I want that.
So that's actually a perfect segue, Tony, into this very quick, and then we'll wrap it up and open for question and answer, just tying in with the topic of this conference, which is pluralism. So how does deliberate practice fit with pluralistic values? And this is just some quick food for thought, but some of the main similarities, I would say, is that there's a big focus on collaborative goal setting in deliberate practice, as well as in pluralism, in that a supervisor wouldn't just want to go ahead and implement a skill building exercise without negotiating with the trainee. Is this something that makes sense for them to be focusing on in their practice, right? And to what Tony was just saying, this ongoing monitoring, assessment of difficulty is a keystone of deliberate practice. If we don't tailor practice to the particular trainee, practice is probably not going to be effective. So for deliberate practice to be deliberate practice, we need to tailor practice to the particular trainee. So again, there's a lot of collaboration and monitoring over time. Also, deliberate practice, I would say, is very integrative and very pluralistic in the sense that these methods aid in disseminating skills from many different theoretical backgrounds. And so we had funny experiences where, you have people who identify more as a psychodynamic therapist, but they volunteer to try out exercises from different models, from CBT, whatever, because this is a nice bite-sized way to get into the different cultures they might not be into originally. And finally, deliberate practice, at least the way that us and our colleagues have always talked about, is we try that it's to be guided by process and outcome monitoring. So the ultimate goal of deliberate practice is that you see outcome effects in your clients, right? So a lot of what you're going to be practicing ideally is going to be informed by, for example, videotaping yourself performing in counseling or psychotherapy, so that you can choose where should you focus on in your practice, and outcome monitoring through your clients, just to see who are the clients that you're not being able to help so much, and trying to focus there so that practice can focus on these harder edges and you can get more effective with those cases.
Alex,
so we see a lot of, go ahead, Tony.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so we see a lot of bridge here and potential for more kind of cross influence over time.
There's been a few questions, comments from the chat that I just want to address verbally, because I think they're super important. Marie Claire noticed that it's different where traditional role plays, you just kind of go through a whole mini counseling session while we're repeating the same skill again and again and again. And yes, this is a big, big difference. Now, it can be valuable to go through a mini session, but what you're not getting is the opportunity to rehearse a bunch of times the same skill. And so in a way, you're really not getting the opportunity to explore your own personal style in the same depth. You're getting some training and putting together a bunch of stuff and responsiveness to the client as the client kind of moves around, which is, of course, very valuable. So we're not against that. But we find that after doing that a lot, trainees still don't end up very confident often, because they've only gotten to do each thing once. And I mean, think about it. If you're a musician, I'm sure we have a lot of people who studied music here at different times. If someone gave you a very complex piece of music, how many times would you want to rehearse it before performing in public? Right? I mean, often people say like 50, 100, or as many as I could, right? Like definitely more than once. right? Like if you're an actor, I mean, if you go and tell an actor, here's a very complex, nuanced script, and you can only rehearse it once, they'll be terrified. Even improvisational actors rehearse again and again and again. So that's what we're encouraging here. Let's see, there was another comment that I thought was really important, where Anna asked, can students get discouraged? And if so, how would you work with this? And I'd say yes. Look, therapy is hard. I don't know about you, but for me, therapy is hard. And asking, you know, even worse than hard is performing it without rehearsing it. So when trainees get discouraged, look, if you're not good at a sport, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you haven't practiced enough. And if you're not good at piano, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you haven't practiced piano enough. And so the thing with therapy is somehow we have lost track of the idea that we need to practice, so we can start to feel that we're bad people. And so if someone gets discouraged, I'm like, yeah, I mean, it makes sense to get discouraged. That's your body telling you that you need to practice more. Like, that's okay. Like, that's how we get better at something. It's not some moral indictment. And so, yeah, I mean, that's part of learning, is it's tough, and to accept that and let people get discouraged time, and we, you know, pull ourselves together and we jump back in and we practice more. And then it is really exciting when we finally can do something we were unable to do before. So Nicholas said a lot of students struggle with specific skills like meta communication. And deliberate practice can help with that. Absolutely. What I would suggest is meta communication is actually a broad category of skills. And I would encourage you to look for more specific micro skills within meta communication. So meta communication of certain kinds of affect or certain cultural you know, attitudes or positions. Meta communication of what? Practice the whole gamut. So and Dee said great bite-sized learning focusing. Yes, that is, I'm very happy to see you say that. That is exactly what we're aiming, is for the smallest bite size possible. You know, in therapy, we're used to talking about these really broad concepts, like have a good working alliance, or, you know, engender trust. And I mean, that's all, of course, very important, but it's, you know, it's like if you were learning football and the coach said, you know, run faster, or, you know, score more. I mean, those are good things to do, but they're not going to help you really be a better football player. What you need to learn is, like, you know, in this specific play at this moment, run like a little quicker in this direction. So
I think, Tony, we have Andrew Reeves who wants to participate. Andrew, can you speak?
Yeah, it's just a quick question. Firstly, I'm really enjoying this. It's been really, really good. And I can, as a trainer myself, I can see how it maps so well onto the training experience for therapists. I suppose I'm thinking of your first slide, which is how people like me, who've been practicing for 35 years, have got increasingly crap as time has ticked on. And I suppose what I'm thinking is, I can really see how it maps onto trainees. How is this rolled out to people who have been practicing for a long time, who you know, maybe effective therapists, but could be more effective therapists? And given that you know, that those therapists have become supervisors and haven't necessarily done a robust supervisor training either, because that's not, you know, that's not perhaps where we would want it to be either. So, you know, when I think of the many thousands of therapists, how do we speak to those who are in practice to help them not kind of stay the same or get slightly worse? Because then they're not an easy audience to reach.
Can I
yeah,
jump in there? Yeah, so great question. The short answer is we're still figuring this out. We're figuring out how to do it with trainees, how to do it with experienced therapists, how to do it, you know, with very experienced therapists. And what I suggest we do is we look to other fields and see what they do. So, you know, professional athletes, they keep rehearsing. They don't stop. professional musicians, when they join the orchestra, they're not like, oh, I made it, now I don't have to rehearse anymore. Professional actors, they just keep rehearsing. Now they have an advantage, which they have a professional culture that not just encourages, but expects them to do that. Therapists often have a culture of, someone mentioned in the chat earlier, CPD, which I'm presuming stands for continual professional development. And we have that in America, and that's in many countries around the world. What we are hoping is we can start to shift continuing professional development to include more rehearsal and more active experiential training, like it would be for most performance fields. So I would work with your professional associations to develop kind of new standards for continual professional development.
And just a very quick thought as well. I wondered about the books that you flagged at the beginning, which were kind of modality orientated books, whether there would be scope if deliberate practice books were also mapped onto kind of key areas of practice rather than a modality that might bring people in who have an interest in working with children and young people, for example, or working with older clients in deliberate practice rather than modality. Just thought.
Yes, this is a great idea. It's a great project. I encourage you to take that on. We will support you in doing it, or anyone here. What we're hoping for is there will there currently are a bunch of different people working in deliberate practice. Bruce Wampold has some really interesting resources with TheraView and other things. There's also Scott Millard and Daryl Chow do a bunch with this, and some others. And if anyone here wants to do this, like Julie's been doing at Abertay, we encourage you to experiment, to try and see, and write a book on using deliberate practice for clients with depression, or for families, or young children. Something we have found is that it's very important to kind of meet the therapist, especially if it's experienced therapists, where their motivation is at. So if we just tell therapists you should practice, it often doesn't go very well, because it's hard, frankly, and you don't get paid more for doing it. But if we go to therapists and we say, okay, so every therapist has a few challenging cases that they wish they were better at helping. All of us do. And if you can go to a therapist, you can be like, okay, here are some exercises to help you get better, in this area where you want to be better, then people are a bit more likely to do it. And that could be a great way to do it.
Tony, there's a great question here from Tess. So it seems a great way of continual learning. However, it seems that the external input is required for tutors, supervisors, coach, etc. With the need for the extra training for these roles, is this just another great theory that is not accessible to the majority due to the prohibitive cost involved? Great question.
It's okay if I answer that. I know I'm
talking Tony, you're on the roll.
This is really a question that's very deep, personal to me. Yeah. So our field is great at developing all these super fancy models, as if you go spend, $10,000, you can get a certification in, or $20,000, or, God knows how much. And, so how many therapists are really going to do that? You know what I mean? It's just not accessible, right? So this is what we're trying to develop, is how do we scale this so it is accessible to everyone around the world? And that's part of the reason we put all these exercises for free on our website. Everything on our website is available for free for use by everyone. And we will continue to produce more and more training resources. We've actually got a team of people working on them now. We're going to just keep putting them on our website, because we really want to just kind of open source this for the worldwide community of therapists. And if you come up with materials that work for you, that work for your trainees, and you're comfortable sharing them, please let us know, and we'll put them up there as well. That's why at the beginning, before this keynote, we were kind of interrogating Julia about what was working at Abertay, because we want to steal it and make it available for everyone. But I just want to say, if you look at other fields like sports, athletics, chess, those training methods are not super expensive. It does not cost $20, $50, $100,000 to become a decent basketball player, or to become a decent football player, or become a decent chess player, right? I think we can achieve that. Now therapy is different. It's definitely different. It's not a perfect metaphor, but I agree that should be our goal, is to find deliver practice solutions that are scalable and accessible. How are we doing on time? What's our time limit?
I think we have 4 minutes.
Okay. Let's see. There's no hands I can pull. Let's see. We've got so many great comments.
Yes.
Let's see.
I'll just do this last bit.
Yeah. Okay. Let's not forget to do this.
Yeah. So just as Tony was saying, so we really tried hard to, make as much of open source materials as possible. So if you go to this website called dpfortherapists.com, you're going to see some tabs here. There's one for videos, one for resources. And the forums you saw today, like the reaction form and the videos you saw and many, many others, are there for free. And so we really encourage you to see what works, try it out, discard what does not work, experiment with it, create your own, email us, and please make our stuff better than it already is. Do research on it, because we really want to make a collaborative effort here. The book series we're going to continue on doing, and as you saw, there's a lot of books coming, and we'll keep producing materials that we'll put up there also for free on the website.
Yeah, Alex, put your email in the chat. I just put mine. So there's a few people that noted something in the comment that I really want to highlight. So Jessica said, DP could be very beneficial for students who find constructive feedback difficult to receive because it's so specific. So to aim at a specific skill could help build resilience. And I want to really highlight that. When we're giving feedback on a specific skill, then it's not about the person of the therapist being a bad person. It's just like, okay, you screwed that up, try it again. Like, look, it happens. That's how we learn, is we screw it up 1,000 times, And so we're destigmatizing all this, right? We're making it okay. We say deliver practice is failure facing. We make it okay to screw up. In fact, the whole goal is to screw up as much as possible before you're sitting with a real client. And it sounds like, at Abertay, there must have been already a very good culture for being open about mistakes and talking about mistakes, for deliver practice to be taken up so quickly. But that's not always the case. There are a fair amount of training programs where students are very nervous about revealing their mistakes because they really want to make sure they're judged as like competent. And they really want to meet the competency benchmarks and all that. And look, I'm a big fan of competence, especially when on the rare occasions that I achieve it. But we get to competence through a lot of failure up front. And so if we're not comfortable showing our failures, like we're just gonna have a hard time getting there.
We have a question here, sorry, Tony, from Razul.
Yes.
Let's see if we can hear him. There, we can see you, and
Please
you're
unmute
still...
yourself.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I think what struck me was that first slide that you put up, that as with the experience, it doesn't necessarily we get better. And what do we do for therapists, experienced therapists, to stay, to keep up their experience? That's one. And one thing that came to my mind was, in UK, we have this thing for cars, which is called the MOT, that annually you go and test your car. So should we be thinking alongside of that kind of attitude, that kind of test for the therapist to have on a regular basis so that they keep their skills up to date?
Yeah, Alex, can I?
Yeah, do it.
Sorry.
No, you're making my life easy. Go for it. I talked a lot in the beginning, man.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So it's a really good point. Part of the challenge here is that therapists, we are one of the most secret fields. If you're an athlete, you're performing in public. People know how good you are. If you're a musician, people know how good you are. If you're a chess player, if you're a doctor, if you're a pilot, the passengers know how good you are, right? as therapists, I mean, we're more secret than a secret intelligence agent. You know, arguably a CIA agent still gets a review once a year. You know what I mean? Someone sees what they're doing. I mean, therapists can work for decades without anyone seeing their work. They don't see their own work, and so what happens, unfortunately, is we tell stories about how what we're doing, and some clients like us and some don't. But the ones who don't like us typically, you know, they kind of disappear. They don't, and we're just left with the ones telling us how good we are. And so it can be very challenging to find out your own weaknesses, your own skill thresholds. And so I can tell you what I've done is I videotape my work. I show the videos to supervisors, to consultants. I track my outcome data with routine outcome monitoring. And yes, I think it would be good. I would rather we have a culture of doing it than the government telling us we have to do it. Because the problem with the government telling us we have to do it is then you're going to have people pretending to do it. And we're going to go backwards from where we are rather than forwards. I mean, the good news is we all became therapists because we wanted to help people, right? And so it's about tapping into that and creating a culture of kind of self-accountability that is not punitive, that is not shaming. It's about we're all just gradually getting better over time. But again, I think this is something that should be dug into by the professional associations in terms of finding ways of encouraging this among therapists. But yeah, I don't think it should be mandated. I think that's a slippery slope that could go in the wrong direction very quickly.
I know we're a bit over time.
Oh,
so
sorry.
that was great. Kate, I don't know if you want to give any concluding remarks or what's the plan?
You want to know how do we end this? I guess all I want to say is that was a fascinating talk. I'm familiar with deliberate practice, but you really brought it to life for us. I have to say the chat has been going absolutely mad, and I have every admiration for you keeping up with the comments. And I suspect that if this was an in-person conference, you would have been stuck in the hotel bar for hours.
That'd be so nice.
Talking to
next
everybody.
Next time.
That would be wonderful. It's been great having you here. So I guess I'm going to ask everyone to do a little electronic clap if you want to unmute.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for, I mean, we love your comments, questions in the chat. It's really wonderful. Some really important points. I'm glad you brought up, reminded us to address. And please don't hesitate to email either of us. You can also contact us through the website. There's some questions that just required more kind of than we had space for today. So we're happy to answer those by email. So
that's wonderful. Thank you, Tony. And I think Jackie, is that a question, a pressing question that you wanted to ask, or is it a hotel bar question? Okay.
No, it was just a clap.
Oh, it was a clap. Sorry, I thought it was like a hand wave. Well done. Thank you so much. Okay, so I will let you go, or you're very welcome to stay with us, and we're just going to have a little half hour. So is it too early to say retrospective? We're going to talk about how the conference was. So I'm going to ask my co-conference organizers to unmute just right now. I think hopefully we will have Anna and Mike and Andrew, and possibly, if we're lucky, Julia will join us briefly. Yeah, I guess what I wanted to say first of all, as I've been really struck by the conference this year in that it has felt unique. So it's the fourth conference that we've had. It's the second one we've had online, but it's felt different, and it's felt like the conversations have been bringing new ideas and new discussions. And I think we can credit Anna and Mike for doing all the work or most of the work, and putting in the effort to really create something wonderful for us today. So I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you, Mike and Anna, and secondarily, Andrew and Julia, for their support. So an electronic clap, I think, for Anna and Mike.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you so much. I just, you know, we couldn't have done it without you guys. It's for us, it's been a huge team effort, and we've really enjoyed it. And I think that there's lots of things that strike me from today that I get today, but I think the thing that's top of my mind is that the technical organization of today has been immense. Thanks so much, John. I've never experienced anything like it. Breakout rooms with breakout rooms or something. I couldn't get my head around it when we were thinking about it last week. But what's really interesting about that today is that everybody's been in different rooms for so much of the day, and yet it's felt so connected. You know, I've really felt that we've all been here connecting together, very joined up, very engaged. It just doesn't feel like we've been in separate rooms, and I've got no idea how that's happened, but I'm glad it's had, and I hope very much that that's been very similar experience for all of you here today.
I'd just like to say that because we were part of the team that organised last year's conference online, which was very different. It was very much about diversity, and we were trying to sort of think, how do we capture that? The energy from that conference and build on that. And that kind of led to the idea of a collaborative revolution. And this conference, we really wanted it to be completely inclusive. So it was taking diversity in a different direction and really bringing in voices from as many different parts of the pluralistic community as we possibly could, which proved to be immensely complex. In terms of planning for us, because we were trying to, you know, people all over the world and with different time zones, with students, with but I'm glad we did, because actually I think it's worked really well for me. I really enjoyed it. I think we've had just a wealth of different voices, and I'm taking away such a lot from last night and from today to go away and think about. I don't know, what do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I scribbled a couple of notes down so I didn't look stupid at the end when I had nothing to say. And actually, the keynote we've just had from Tony and Alex speaks to that specifically, but also metaphorically, because I thought, you know, some of the things that I'm taking away very specifically, and that's what I've really enjoyed about this conference, it's not just being conceptual and philosophical, it's actually being quite concrete as well in terms of what is it we need to do next. And there was the point that you made, actually, Anna, yesterday at the discussion, which is, you know, we can develop pluralistic practice, but actually it's got to be supported in practice. And so we need to do some much more work around supervision and supervisors, which was your point. And I think going to the research group, which I really enjoyed, some fantastic research that really speaks to the development of practice. I thought it was absolutely amazing. But it really struck me that how we can encourage people who aren't in university context to feel comfortable to do research, and how can we support ethics committees that are based in university context to actually see a pluralistic framework for research. So something about supervision, something about the ethics of pluralistic practice. Things that we need to do better, actually. I think that we've had some really useful challenges around inclusivity and diversity. And I agree, Anna, we worked really hard to do this, but it's important that we don't kind of stay with a position which is that we welcome people in, because actually that's still not going to bring the people in that we want, that we're trying to aim. We need to go out proactively, even more so, I think, to speak to communities that wouldn't otherwise even think of contacting us. And I think you know, the whole notion of deliberate practice that's just been talked about, again, very specifically, but I think actually it's also pointing to the deliberate things that we need to do. And the last thing I really wanted to say was what's been said throughout. We have a steering group, a research group, a creativity group, and a group that's looking around issues of diversity. And we're also thinking of developing a group that's looking around pluralism and multidisciplinary practice. And if you have been moved or touched or interested by anything that we've been said, and you want to get involved in that, then contact us. I'll put my email address again in the chat in a moment. We've already had quite a few emails, and particularly from students who want to get involved in the steering group, which is fantastic. Yeah, please get involved. You know, this is truly about wanting us to take this forward, and if we are having a collaborative revolution, then we need people to help us do that. So I've you know, it's now coming up to 6 o'clock, nearly 24, well, just over 24 hours since we first started, although we did sleep a little bit in between times. And brilliant, really good. And thanks to John and full team at Online Events, and thanks to the University of South Wales for co-hosting this with us. And I would echo my thanks to Mike and Anna too. Sterling job.
Thank you, Andrew. That feels like it was beautifully wound up, but in the spirit of pluralism, I wonder if there is a need for us to be thinking about next year's conference and what shape that would be, and whether there are people who also want to get involved in deciding how we go. In my head, I've got this fantasy about a big meadow somewhere in Hampshire, and tents and tambourines and bonfires and toasted marshmallows. But that's just me and my idea of a conference. So if anyone's up for that.
Glastonbury.
A pluralistic version of.
And I really enjoyed also having the students as part of, but also having those workshops, you know, practice into research, because there's so much ideas came out of that, and there's so many videos I want to go and watch now that I didn't get a chance to watch today, to sort of fire up that idea of where are we going to go with the research. And I thought a lot of what John McLeod said was just so relevant. I took such a lot away from that. Thank you, John, about, you know, what is needed in research, rather than just ordinarily going off and doing research. It's like, well, it needs to be very direct, and we need to be having that conversation amongst ourselves, don't we, about how can we get practitioners and students and the diversity engaged in research in a meaningful way.
Absolutely.
I guess it's a chance as well. You know, if there's anybody else in the audience still who's got any final things to say before the conference finishes, kind of either put it in the chat. I know there's lots of comments coming on the chat, and lots of people going to be in the tent with you, Kate. But you know, just if you want to say it, put your hand up. You know, whether it's a challenge for where you want to see the conference going, or kind of things that you've heard, or just any final things that you need to say to finish the conference off for yourself. Put your hand up, and now's your chance.
Andrew, can I just say as well, like I went to your workshop on risk and stuff, and I thought that what you did, your piece of paper and plan with the client, was really beautiful. And I can now see myself getting the students to do this as a deliberate practice exercise. So I think
good point.
There's potential there. Yeah.
That's kind of you to say that, Julia. And interestingly, when we were talking about the books, I mean, Alex and Tony, my research areas around working with clients at risk of suicide, and I thought, well, that's my next book, isn't it? Deliberate practice in working with risk of suicide. So no doubt you'll want a cut of the royalties for that, for introducing it to me. But no, yeah, thank you, Julia.
And was just so pleased to have Tony and Alex here, especially after, you know, that we'd all organised to go to Dublin and there were going to be keynotes there. And it was all really cancelled at the last minute because of COVID. So it's just so good that I would have liked to see them in person.
They can come to the festival that is being planned in the chat.
I can't see anyone with a hand up, so I think maybe it's that people would like to go home and.
Yeah, just before we do, John, whose surname is Online Events. could you, is there any chance you can put back in and just talk through kind of what happens next in terms of recordings and things like that, so people are clear what happens?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're hoping to have all the recordings ready in 2 weeks, so by the beginning of August. So because there's just been such a lot of great stuff. So it'll take us a bit of time to compile everything, record everything. Well, we've already recorded it, just trim it so it's just right for us to watch. And then we'll email everybody who registered for the conference. Yeah, so you'll get that as an email in your inbox, and you can spend the holidays watching the bits of the conference that you miss. So, yeah, perfect way to spend August, I think. And I just want to say too, I've really enjoyed working with the team. It's the second conference that we've worked together 2 years in a row. So it's been a real privilege to be with the team and be with the community all day and last night too. So it's just been great. And a big thank you to the online events team as well, because I get to turn my microphone on, but it's the rest of the team that are doing all the hard work in the background. And I know Sebastian's still here and the rest of the team that are off as well. So yeah, real credit to them too.
Yeah, thank you. I think, as Julia says, I think it's time for people to go on and have a rest and reflect and do whatever you're going to do. Anna.
Mike's got his hand up. Mike, did you want to ask a question?
Oh.
You're muted, Mike.
I think I'm unmuted now, am I?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. People might balk at this idea, but as much as I'd love to be in a big tent with fellow students and colleagues, etc., but for the future, I wonder if a blended approach to the conference might suit some people in terms of accessibility, cost, etc. Just a point to bear in mind for next year, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely, definitely. And I think, you know, some people are able to attend conferences and want to be there, but actually our experience has been this year and certainly last year too, that the online has made it so much more accessible for so many people for lots and lots of reasons. So yeah, I can't speak for everyone, but my own view would be that we would definitely maintain and retain an online approach to the conference as well. Who knows where we're going to go in terms of face-to-face events, but certainly online will continue.
Wonderful. Okay. So everybody who's been here and has had a wonderful time, this isn't the end of a conference and you have to wait till next year. Keep in touch with the community. We have groups, we have conversations. It's a pretty lively bunch. So yes, let you go and enjoy the rest of your day, but yeah, keep in touch. Thank you for coming.